There's a locomotive engineer somewhere in Kansas right now who hasn't slept in his own bed for 6 days. And when his phone buzzes at 2:47 in the morning, telling him to report to the yard by 4:15, he's going to get up and put his boots on because if he doesn't, he loses points. And if he loses enough points, he loses his job. And his mortgage doesn't care that he promised his daughter he'd be at her basketball game this weekend. He's been doing this for 14 years, and somewhere around year 8, his wife stopped asking when he'd be home because the answer was always the same. I don't know, depends on when they call me. Could be tonight, could be 3 days from now. I'll let you know when I know. She's not his wife anymore. Most of the guys he started with are either divorced or heading that way. And the ones who aren't have spouses who learned a long time ago that loving a railroad man means accepting that the railroad comes first, second, and third, and if there's anything left over after that, maybe you'll get a piece of it on Christmas if the board is slow, and the railroads are wondering why nobody wants this job anymore. If you'd told someone in 1975 that being a locomotive engineer would become one of the hardest jobs to fill in America, they would have looked at you like you'd lost your mind. Back then, railroad jobs were golden. Your father worked on the railroad, his father worked on the railroad, and when you graduated high school, you walked into the hiring office and put your name on a list because that's what you did. The pay was good, the benefits were better, the pension was solid, and yeah, the hours were rough. But you knew what you were signing up for, and so did your family. There was pride in it. You were moving the country. Every ton of coal, every car full of grain, every container of goods that kept the economy running. That was you, sitting in that cab, watching the miles roll by. Something happened over the last 20 years, and the men who are still out there running locomotives will tell you exactly when they felt the change. It crept in slowly at first, a little more pressure here, a few more cuts there. And then around 2015 or 2016, when the railroad started implementing something called precision scheduled railroading, the whole thing went off a cliff. The idea behind PSR sounds reasonable enough when you hear the executives explain it in their quarterly earnings calls. You run fewer trains, but you make them longer. You cut the fat out of the operation. You eliminate redundancy. You do more with less. Wall Street loved it, because the operating ratios dropped and the stock prices went up, and the railroad CEOs collected their bonuses and told everyone this was the future of efficient freight transportation. The guys in the cab saw something different. They saw train lengths go from 1 mile to 2 miles to 3 miles, which means more tonnage to control, more things that can go wrong, more stress on equipment that was already being maintained on tighter and tighter schedules. They saw their coworkers getting furloughed by the thousands. Union Pacific alone eliminated almost 12,000 jobs between 2018 and 2020, and the work didn't disappear. It just got spread across fewer people. They saw the attendance policies get stricter and stricter until taking a sick day felt like gambling with your career. BNSF rolled out something called Hi-Viz that gave employees a fixed number of points, and every time you missed a call or took unscheduled time off, you lost points, and when you ran out of points, you were looking for a new job. One railroad wife posted online that her husband had to choose between losing points to help care for their sick child or saving those points in case of a real emergency later, because there wasn't enough cushion in the system to do both. And all of this happens on top of a schedule that was already brutal before anyone had ever heard of precision scheduled railroading. Here's what people don't see when they watch a freight train roll through town. That engineer in the cab has been on call for the last 6 days straight, waiting for his phone to ring. He doesn't know if he's going to work at 6 in the morning or 6 at night or 2 in the morning or not at all. He can't make plans. He can't commit to anything. His entire life revolves around being ready to go within 2 hours of getting that call. And once he gets called, he might be gone for 2 or 3 days before he sees his house again. The trip out takes 12 hours, maybe 14 if there are delays, and then he's stuck at an away terminal, usually a cheap hotel near a rail yard, waiting to be called for the trip back. Federal law says he has to get at least 10 hours of rest between shifts, so the railroad puts him in a room and waits until his rest is up, and then calls him whenever the next train is ready, which might be 8 hours later or might be 30 hours later. Nobody can tell him for sure. One engineer documented his October for a news crew. 200 hours on the train, 200 hours in hotel rooms, and whatever was left over was technically home time, except that even at home he was on call, so he couldn't really relax because the phone could ring at any moment. His daughter had cheer practice and games and school events, and he missed most of them, because when the railroad calls, you go. Taking time off requires planning weeks in advance, and even then it might get denied. And if you mark off sick too many times, they put you in what they call an attendance program, which is corporate language for being one step away from termination. There's a quote from a Texas engineer that sticks with me. He said living this life is like existing in a shadow. You never know when you're going to sleep. You never know when you're going to eat. You never know when you'll see your family. The only thing you can count on is that when the rest requirement is up, you're going back to work. He talked about taking stimulants to stay awake during shifts and sleeping pills to fall asleep during rest periods, then more stimulants to wake up from the sleeping pills, and this cycle just kept repeating until he couldn't tell the difference between exhaustion and his actual personality anymore. And we haven't even talked about what happens out on the track. The statistics say that a locomotive engineer with a 25-year career will be involved in approximately 3 fatalities. That's not a maybe, that's an average. Trespassers on the tracks. People in cars who try to beat the crossing. And yes, people who step in front of trains on purpose because they've decided that's how they want to go. The engineer sees all of it. From a quarter mile away, they see someone standing on the tracks, and they hit the horn, and they hit the emergency brake. But a freight train weighing 20,000 tons takes over a mile to stop, and there's nothing they can do except watch. One engineer described the sound of impact as something that stays with you forever. Another said, the worst part is knowing exactly where it happened, because every time his train passes that spot on the route, he remembers. The railroads offer counseling now, which is better than it used to be when they just tell you to finish your run and deal with it. But a lot of engineers say the real problem is that nobody prepares you for the cumulative weight of it. The first incident might not affect you that much. The second one hits harder. By the third or fourth, you're having trouble sleeping. You're drinking more than you should. You're snapping at your family when you're actually home to see them. And you start to wonder if any of this is worth it anymore. Post-traumatic stress runs higher in locomotive engineers than in almost any other civilian occupation. And the nature of the job means you're constantly returning to the locations where traumatic things happened because those are still part of your regular route. A former Metra engineer in Chicago said he couldn't or didn't want to remember how many people he'd been involved with. But he knew he was finally getting over one particular incident when he stopped staring at that exact spot on the track every time he passed it. That took years. So when you ask why nobody wants to drive trains anymore, you have to understand what you're actually asking someone to sign up for. You're asking them to spend years working as a conductor first, learning the rules and the routes and the equipment before they can even apply to be an engineer. You're asking them to complete 6 more months of training after that, plus federal certification, plus ongoing recertification and testing for the rest of their career. You're asking them to accept that for the first several years they'll be on the extra board, which means the absolute worst shifts, the middle of the night calls, the holiday assignments. Not the trips nobody else wants, because seniority determines everything on the railroad and the new guys get whatever's left. You're asking them to accept that their family will come second, their health will come third, and the railroad will always come first, no matter what anyone says in the recruiting materials. And for what? The money is good. Nobody disputes that. Class 1 railroads are paying experienced engineers somewhere between $90,000 and $140,000 a year, with benefits that push total compensation even higher. But there's a line that keeps showing up in interviews and online reviews from current employees that tells you everything you need to know about where things stand. They say they would take less money if it meant having a real life. They say you can't replace the time you miss with your kids, no matter how big the paycheck is. They say the money used to feel like compensation for the sacrifice, and now it just feels like a bribe to keep people from walking away. The pandemic made everything worse. When freight volumes crashed in early 2020, the railroads furloughed crews by the tens of thousands, and when volumes came back faster than anyone expected, they tried to call those workers back. A lot of them didn't answer. They'd found other jobs during the furlough, jobs with regular schedules and predictable hours and weekends off, and even if those jobs paid less, the workers had gotten a taste of what normal life felt like, and they weren't willing to give it up. The railroad spent the next 2 years scrambling to hire and train new people, and some of them still haven't caught up. Amtrak reported being 1,500 workers short in 2024 and had to cut service on some routes because they literally didn't have enough qualified crew to run the trains. The unions fought for better conditions in the 2022 contract negotiations, and the main thing they asked for wasn't more money. They asked for sick days and predictable schedules and the ability to take time off without being penalized into oblivion. The railroads refused. Congress forced a contract through to avoid a strike, and the workers got their raises, but not the quality of life improvements they'd been begging for. Some railroads have started voluntary pilot programs since then. Union Pacific tested an 11 days on, 4 days off schedule with a small group of engineers in Kansas City. But these are experiments, not industry-wide changes. And the guys who aren't in those pilot programs are still living the same on-call existence they've been living for years. There's a reason the railroad families used to joke that the divorce rate for locomotive engineers was the highest of any occupation in America. Whether that's statistically true or not, the joke persists because it feels true to the people living it. The forums where railroad spouses gather to talk about their lives are filled with stories about marriages falling apart under the weight of constant absence and unpredictable schedules, and the slow erosion of intimacy that happens when two people stop being able to plan a future together. One woman posted that her husband's job didn't leave room for her at all. Another said she finally understood why her father-in-law had been married 3 times, and yet trains still need to run. Freight still needs to move. The economy still depends on those locomotives pulling containers across the country, and somebody has to sit in that cab and make it happen. The question the railroads are facing now is who that somebody is going to be, because the pipeline of young people willing to accept this life is getting thinner every year, and the experienced engineers who've stuck it out this long are hitting retirement age and walking away. And the knowledge they carry in their heads about how to actually run a railroad is walking out the door with them. The average age of a locomotive engineer keeps creeping up. The average years to fill an open position keeps stretching out. The training investment required to bring someone from 0 experience to certified engineer is measured in years, and every time someone quits during that process, the railroad has to start over with somebody new. The math doesn't work if you can't keep people, and you can't keep people if the job destroys everything else in their lives. There's an engineer in Ohio who retired early after his second experience with someone stepping in front of his train. He was diagnosed with PTSD, put on medication, and told he'd probably never fully recover. When a reporter asked him if he missed the job, he said he used to love trains, used to look at them with reverence, used to feel proud of what he did. Now, he doesn't want to be anywhere near a locomotive ever again. 33 years on the railroad, and that's how it ended. The railroads say they're working on it. They say they're listening to employee feedback. They say they're committed to improving quality of life. And maybe some of that is true, and maybe things will get better someday. But right now, tonight, there's still a guy in Kansas staring at his phone waiting for it to ring, wondering if he'll make it home in time to see his daughter before she goes to sleep, already knowing the answer is probably no. That's the job. That's what they're asking people to sign up for. And fewer people are saying yes.